Exactly. Well, we pinged him and he came, and then when I tried to get him on stage, he was nowhere to be. He didn't want to get up on stage, so we might have to hunt him down here in Clubhouse. We got a fugitive on the loose, not wanting to pay a bet. So for those who forget, we had a really fun bet on stage between Kieran and somebody named Rico Nakamoto. Rico said that Bitcoin was going to go up, and Kieran said no, it's going to go down. And they attached numbers to their bet, and Rico said that he would lose if it went below, I think, 53,000, and Kieran said he would lose if it went above like 60 something, 65,000, something like that. And it went below 53. Although Kieran nearly lost got real close, like almost within $1,000. Then it fell down, and Kieran won. So Rico Nakamoto, if you're out there, cough up that Bitcoin. We have a champagne fund for tech news around the world that we need the ice bucket refilled, Rico. So
I
welcome
would
back.
appreciate that.
Yeah, welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a very lovely Tuesday. For those of our friends around the world, and a good morning to everybody waking up on the West Coast. We did have a session earlier today. It was we've been having some unusually good sessions lately. Like today was great.
Fantastic session this morning.
Both
Loved
sessions
it.
yesterday were kind of watermarks, and we keep growing.
Strong content, strong data,
yeah,
strong stories,
yeah,
and lots of good contributions. Loved it.
exactly, yeah. It's been fun, and today,
And very, very smooth debate. No interruption. Not much.
yeah, it's been strong. There was actually some. It got a little heated. Stella in the last session, Stella
That
and
was the
Dan
first
got
climate. That was one of the few climate rumbles. We should have more
Yeah,
climate rumbles.
we had.
I think.
You're
Yeah,
right.
that was.
Yeah, we've
I
not
love the
used
climate rumbles.
the "Let's Get Ready to Rumble" sound effect for a while, but it happened today over the future of energy usage, oil and green energy, and it got a little heated. No pun intended. A little global warming on stage, but
Don't
yeah,
mention the
No.
war.
yeah,
It's cold versus solar and wind.
yeah. Exactly, yeah. So I want to welcome everybody, but we can save our welcome for while people are jumping into the room fast and furious over the next 30
Tyler,
minutes.
before I forget,
Yeah.
it's the moon sighting tonight, so it might be the end of Ramadan. Eid Mubarak from me to everyone. It's I guess no one knows what Eid is.
This is the last day of Ramadan, I guess?
Oh, congrats to
Yeah, the
you,
last day
Yeah,
of
Faraz.
Ramadan.
Yeah.
yeah.
Eid
Inshallah.
Mubarak.
So Eid Mubarak to everyone. If you guys don't know how to say that,
Is
say
that the
TM to the ME, which means Eid Mubarak to the Middle East, or however you want to do it.
To
All right.
you as well,
God
Faraz.
bless.
Yeah.
You as well, bro.
So let's do like this. We've got all kinds of news, political, tech news, with the pipeline hacking. That story continues to develop. There's VR news, really high on the list today with a big event happening and starting in an hour. There's, of course, China news and green tech news, med tech news, AI, fintech, crypto, India, Africa, etc. So let's jump into it. Who wants to go first?
Shall I give a headline, Tyler?
Go for it, Jonathan.
Okay, so Nikkei Asia reports that big tech tax burdens are just 60% of the global average.
Say that again.
So big tech,
Yep.
so the four big tech companies
Yep.
pay 15% on average tax compared with the next 50,000 large companies worldwide, which is 60%. So they only pay 60% of the global average for tax.
I did not know this. And if you go in past the headline, I don't even have a good sense for if that's high or on target or below what is expected.
It's below. It's below.
Yeah, it's basically it's 40% lower.
Yeah.
So the way they run their businesses is 40% more tax efficient than the next 50,000 companies in size.
Yep. And apologies for multitasking as I start the show here, but is that for U.S. or global, or Europe or
So that's
I
worldwide.
think most of the
That's
companies are in
worldwide.
the U.S.
Yeah,
But the big
Most big tech is U.S.
right.
Yeah, so they're comparing the big four: Google, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon, with the next 50,000 largest companies worldwide.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So they have some catching up to do, but I think that's part of the animosity that big tech feels globally, is specifically around the sentiment that they're not paying their fair share to some degree.
Yeah, and they're moving around their profits between different countries, and so
Yeah.
different countries
Well,
around the world
Cal,
get
let's do one of those polls that we used to do, and this could be the easiest one we've ever done. Are the big tech companies paying
the fair share of tax,
a reasonable amount of tax? Yeah. I don't even want to. Maybe it's not so simple after all, because if we phrase it, for example, like if you were, in charge, if you were in charge, you're the leader of a country. Would you charge? Would you be happy with whatever tax they're paying, for example? Because if you say, are they paying?
Tyler, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Over here, because they're paying 40% below average, but then again, all right, let's not always crucify them here.
Right.
they're investing, etc. No,
That's why I said maybe people are
I'm on the
okay
other
with
side
it.
of this.
Yeah.
So maybe, you should, because Justin's here, the political side of this, which is what they invest back in the economy and the green side of it.
Right.
Do we have any stats on that?
Right. Well, this headline came up about 24 hours ago or 48 hours ago about Amazon, for example, in Europe again this year is not paying taxes because they didn't have any profits. They had a loss. So according to law, they don't need to pay taxes. And then Amazon spokesperson said, yeah, of course we're not paying taxes. We didn't have any profits. So let's go open a tax, law book and read it for yourself. Responding to the journalist, they reached out to Amazon for a comment, and Amazon's like, it's real simple. What don't you understand about the ABCs of paying taxes? You pay taxes on profits. You idiot journalist, get out! Stop wasting our time. And we invest billions of dollars in Europe. So what exactly are you questioning? So this is my point: is just generally, just general sentiment analysis. Do people think the big tech companies are paying enough tax or not? Because of course it's part a lot of it is investment, especially in the case of Amazon. Yeah.
And Justin, just before you interject, just to give some perspective here, Samsung Electronics, which is obviously a big tech company in its own right, paid nearly 30% tax. Toyota Motors 26%, Siemens in Germany 25%. So it's just interesting to take that in context.
Yeah, I mean, Samsung's quite a mature, these much more mature companies. Once they get into 15, 20, 25-year, 30-year-old companies, they're not investing heavily in the infrastructure, especially if they're not growing in Amazon's defense. They're growing into Europe. I mean, they were based in the US. Their growth into Europe, and then now they're growing into Asia. They're going to be spending billions of dollars as they continue to grow into Asia for the next 5 to 10 years. They'll be spending still for another few years in Europe. And then once they built the infrastructure to dominate it, really, then they're going to assumedly be paying taxes there. And if they don't, I imagine the EU is not going to let them get away with it.
And so I can only offer my perspective, right? And I'm not a Nobel-winning economist, so I cannot go about the ins and outs and intended and unintended consequences with any type of authority on this subject. But what I do know is there is a common narrative in the United States, at least, I cannot speak for Europe, that reducing taxes on corporations and allowing them, and even in cases writing in loopholes so that they can avoid paying taxes, ultimately leads to greater reinvestment in the business and greater reinvestment in their workers. And obviously on a spectrum that is true. If you were to tax a company 70% of their revenue, then I'm sure that investment would be reduced. But at the levels that we're talking about, from the experiences that I have had working for a Fortune 400 company. Everybody can look it up. It was called Seaboard Corporation. I've learned, and this is from my own political messaging, that a lot of this narrative is bullshit. Specifically, it's used by, I don't want to say malicious actors, but it's used by ideological actors on the conservative side to kind of scare people away from raising taxes on these companies, which would only, in my perspective, for the most part, obviously you can't make broad statements, so please realize that this is nuanced. Like, I think Jonathan just made a point of saying 3 other technology companies were paying 26 to 30% in taxes. But from my perspective, most of the time, when you have tax cuts like we experienced under the Trump administration, those money go into stock buybacks or into the coffers of the company. And specifically, the other point I'd like to make is that I think, sorry, I'm walking my dog, so I'm out of breath. I think personally, from my perspective, that these companies will be making investments in those markets regardless, because there is a great benefit and a great long-term win by just getting access to these markets and also cheap and efficient supply chains. So I think ultimately raising taxes on these companies to, I don't know, 28%, maybe what we used to have, 34%, wouldn't necessarily see all of these drastic consequences that are messaged from a political standpoint, and would probably just bring more money into the countries that are taxing them.
So let's
Justin, your perspective is contrary to all the your perspective is basically leftist ideology, which never worked in the history of the world.
Well, Milos, let's try and bring facts here, right? In the United States, we were doing extraordinarily well in the 50s and 60s. And I would just ask you not to spew propaganda and actually look up the tax brackets for individuals and corporations back in the 50s and 60s when, and I think that this is a fact, wealth income inequality was at a much lower than it is today, and our GDP was significantly higher. So I think that just spewing propaganda back without any facts is a little bit dangerous.
I mean, you are turning this room to the political propaganda of the political
No, Mio, so
propaganda.
I actually asked the question, so he's not doing propaganda.
Yeah, he's not trying to propagandize the room.
I asked the question, so there's no propaganda. He very well answered it. Forgive me, Mios. I'm always looking for answers. I asked the question. He's not trying to commit propaganda, and what he said there, frankly speaking, actually makes sense to me, because those companies are going to make those investments anyway, and giving him a tax loophole is just another thing.
No,
whether you tax him higher.
There's Google Seaboard Corporation. They went on $100 million buyback.
Taxes are not higher taxes are not promoting growth. Higher taxes are only halting growth.
You're just looking at the pure economic sense of it. If economics textbooks made sense, we could simply sit here and memorize economics textbooks and build economies. That's not the way the real world works.
Also provide another statistic. As a share of GDP since 1990 and present day, US GDP, because of the reduced tax burden, has fallen by 1% comparatively. So it has a big effect on the whole economy. And I'm not arguing whether it's right or wrong. I mean, to Justin's point about buybacks, I think Amazon is on a buyback at the moment, aren't they? They're going to buy back. They're going to issue a bond and then buy back, use some of those funds to buy back equity.
Hi, this is Shirley. I'd like to make a contribution.
Go, Shirley.
So I really support what Justin said, because actually, I think in 2019, Amazon made a huge commitment to retrain 100,000 workers. And I do feel that new skills, emerging skills do originate within these companies, because they do a lot of research, right? R&D. And that is how they're able to offset profits, etc. So, I mean, I'd rather that than hand it to the UK government, which, if you look at the way they've treated taxpayers' money, I just think, it's a nuanced discussion. And I do feel that Amazon is on the whole trying to do its best, and I think it's good because it does drive investment in capacity building, knowledge, etc. I think it's a news discussion and it's interesting. That's
yeah. So I want to try and figure out the right wording for a poll for the audience. Like, do the big tech companies pay their fair share?
Just make it simple because it's so nuanced,
I
right? To
know
Shirley's point,
it's so difficult.
because there's two different levels.
I just want to get a general sense. Are they paying? Are they
Are they
paying
paying
Enough
too much
taxes.
tax?
Huh?
If you don't mind,
Enough.
I'd like
Yeah. Are
maybe
they paying
I'd
enough?
like
Yeah.
to I'd just would like to give one number regarding specifically Amazon. In Europe in 2020, they've made 44 billion of euros of revenues, but they have repatriated their profits into their Luxembourg subsidiary,
Yeah.
and therefore are tax exempt in Europe. So without going into the is it right, is it wrong, I think we have, at least in certain countries, we have the possibility for such companies legally to not pay taxes as they can optimize for tax. And I think that the question, and I like the way Justin has framed it, I think the question is more as an economy and as a country or a group of countries such as Europe, what position do we want to take vis-a-vis those very large companies who are job contributors, but despite the high profit that they are making that they would make if they were not to optimize, despite this profit, they're still not paying taxes and therefore not contributing to the same extent other local companies are. So for me, it's more an ethical problem. I don't think they're doing anything illegal. I think that loops back also with the recently discussion around Uber drivers in the UK and the minimum wage. I think that was end of March, where there was this conversation whether or not the UK should oblige Uber to pay a minimum wage and consider them as salaried, and that will have, of course, effect in the rest of Europe. I think the question is might be economic for sure, but is also ethical, I think.
Well, you could say it's ethical on both sides. Like,
I think they just hire very, very savvy tax consultant. That's all.
right?
Yeah,
Is it?
absolutely.
They would say it's ethical. It's a requirement of them ethically to pay as little tax as possible to their shareholders.
And I would
And
agree
their
with
employees.
that. And I think it's sorry, Carl, I'll let you go in a second. I think it's an ethical problem from the government's perspective. I don't support companies paying more taxes than they should, right? And just to bring in another fact point into this, people go Google Kansas. They lowered all their corporate tax rates in 2012 just to really put a fine point on this. And it really fucked up their state budget. And they had to cut funding to schools, and they had to cut a lot of things because these companies that they expected to make all of these large reinvestments and come flooding into the state. Sorry, somebody's being an ass. They didn't come in, and the investments were not made. And this was the great GOP orthodoxy. They thought that if they lowered the taxes on corporations, it would really solve a lot of these issues through spurring on investment and increasing employment. And it didn't happen. So go look it up.
Yeah.
Tyler,
Isn't this the same as the trickle-down effect?
Yeah.
If I can actually share some figures, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah.
So having come from Seattle, we talked about this all the time, but these figures are from the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy. So Amazon's worldwide pre-tax income for 2020 was $24 billion, up 73% from the $14 billion it enjoyed in the last pre-pandemic year. Sales were up 38% over the prior year during the pandemic. The company's U.S. income in 2020 was $20 billion. If Amazon had paid 21% of its profits in federal income tax, that would have come to $4.1 billion. The company's reported current tax of $1.8 billion was less than half that, meaning last year Amazon avoided $2.3 billion in taxes. I'm Florian and I'm done speaking.
Yeah, and that's just the U.S., right? So,
right.
It should. It's such a difficult question, deceptively not easy to phrase it for an audience poll in this way. But if you do the big tech companies
pay enough tax?
Pay a fair amount.
Yeah, pay a fair amount.
Okay,
of tax.
fair amount.
Yeah.
Let's say
Do
that.
the
Yeah.
big tech
Okay, there it is. Let's try it. Yeah, it's been a while since we did a poll.
Simple.
So let's try this. Raise your hand using the jump up on stage button. I believe it's in the bottom right-ish corner or bottom left. That's a little hand icon to raise your hand to speak. That's how we use that as a way to do polls here. We're in the poll that we're going to ask right now is to you personally, and this is an anonymous poll. Do the big tech companies pay a fair amount of tax? Raise your hand now if you believe they do. And then we're going to count the folks who raised their hands, which is currently at 7 and rising 8, and we'll give it a few seconds here.
Rising very slowly.
Yeah, they're not going up fast. 9, 11, going once, going twice, 12, 13. Do I see 13? We've got 12. Let's say 12. Thank you. Hands down, please. And now raise your hand if you think the big tech companies don't pay a fair enough of tax. And we're already at 15, and we're at 32, and we're at 30, 40, 45, 49, 50, 55, 56, 56 going once, 56 going twice, 56. So
Okay, that's
A lot of
clear.
communists in this room.
yeah. So
Communists in this room, but the
Man, I
question
think there's
was
a lot of
supposed to be framed
misinformation.
differently. I would frame question differently. I would frame question: does the higher taxes promote growth, economic growth, or does the lower taxes promote economic growth?
well, they kind of answered that in a way, loosely. But this is why it's good to get a pulse check on the audience. And I'll be honest, I'm not surprised by the result. I mean, it's a little higher than I thought it would be. I knew that the answer in general, that side would have more votes. Maybe it's a bit more than I expected, but the overall sentiment isn't that big of a surprise to me. On stage, who feels someone who want to take a strong side on one side or the other, if was somebody really surprised by the audience, and
I was
also
a little surprised at how far it went on the no.
yeah.
The global tax situations are complex, right?
Yeah.
And they're the harmonization. The countries are trying to work on it,
Right.
and different countries have very different dynamics and their vested interest, right? So when I look at somebody like Samsung, they have a very different relationship with their state, right?
Yes.
And people like Justin have a better sense of the political. I mean, these are state capitalist, companies that have it's a complex relationship. So that they'll pay tax to the state, but effectively they're a part state company, right? They have like 2 or 3 big companies that are so closely related to the. So you can't really compare those to these. To the U.S. based companies in a sense. And then to Shirley's point, I just think that there is a strong perspective, and I don't know whether it's 50-50, 60-40, 30-70. I don't know what that is in the UK, where I'm not going to give my money to the government to try and figure out where to invest. They've not been able to do it around the new technology areas. Amazon's probably better at that. So I don't know. This stuff is complex.
I just want to add in another data point. For everybody saying lower taxes helps out, Jeff Bezos recently has been quoted saying he supports a higher tax rate on Amazon, that he's working with the Biden administration to make that possible because he thinks it's in the best interest of economic growth. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
So Tyler, and I know that I hate all of these companies because of the pure data stuff that I know about, and that I hold very dear and close to my heart. So I have shared despite of these companies, but I don't have a bias. Okay, I think the way that the public is informed, it is clearly a bias because of the hatred from the brews from various other news headlines and various other things that these companies are doing.
Yeah,
If we think
perhaps.
of this if you think of this purely from a business perspective, right? Okay, there's thievery, which they're conducting in many different fashions of everything that they do in terms of our beings, our data, etc., etc., etc. And a lot of people are pissed off with that. But then when I look at myself as a businessman, And if I'm being taxed in a country, right, and I can afford the right attorney the tax attorney who can tell me the different loopholes to pay my way out of tax, every individual here, no matter what corporate tax or personal tax rate you're in, you'll pay it. So think of it that way, and then think about how you would vote.
So
That's
yeah,
just my two cents worth.
why does the EU allow for this Luxembourg tax loophole? Essentially,
There you go. If they allow for it, it's okay then. If they're allowing for it, it should be okay for these guys to do
well,
it then.
that's where
There's
the issue,
nothing.
the question, the wording of the question of is it fair comes in, because some people would say, yeah, it's fair, but the EU knows what's
It's
going on.
fair then.
Yeah, and
Tyler, can I
Yeah.
jump in here
of
real
course,
quickly?
yeah,
I actually sort of agree with what Faraz is saying. So I think what we should have, at least in the context of the U.S., is not necessarily a higher tax rate, but a more effective tax system to optimize the sort of tax income or the tax revenue that the government can generate, right? So, for example, when we invest in property development in the States, we can employ a nice, expensive law firm to get us what's called a C Corp blocker structure. So we're basically not, if our IRR is under 15% per annum, we don't need to pay any taxes. We only pay taxes on any income above that rate, right? So anyone who can legally structure their company to benefit from these tax, I mean, I don't know if you want to call it a loophole, but these tax saving structures will benefit from it. So I think ultimately it's not really hurting the businesses that can afford to pay these taxes. It's ultimately actually hurting the small and medium businesses
yeah.
that can't afford to hire the fancy law firms to build these structures out for them. So going back to my point,
Bingo.
it's not raising the actual tax rate, but finding an effective way to collect taxes from small, medium, and the ultra large corporations.
Yeah, but the last point on this is the bigger companies have a disproportionate resources to tip the game in their favor in some states, for example, and I would accuse the U.S. of this more so than the EU, but that might be naive in that regard. And there's some states that are even far easier to influence. Um, yeah. So
To go
anyway,
back to your question, Tyler, on is it fair that Luxembourg is a tax haven? I think this is heavily debated and frequently redebated in Europe. And last event was in February last year, where there's been an investigation by the French newspaper Le Monde that has looked into the number of offshore companies that are managing assets in Luxembourg, have their head office or a subsidiary into which they can repatriate profit. And so they found that there's 55,000 of those offshore companies that are domiciled in the Luxembourg, managing 6 trillion of euros without having any employees or offices. And so, of course, this is the responsibility of the EU to put its act together, and it should and probably will at some point. But right now, the data that I want to share with you, I've not verified, but it's quoted from the International Monetary Fund that has disclosed that annually it costs European governments between 500 billion and 600 billion lost corporate tax revenue. So I think we're talking about a huge problem, at least in Europe. I'm not aware of the American situation, but for sure in Europe, very frequently we go back into that issue on why we are still allowing, or is it legitimate, or is it fair to still allow for certain countries, there's been Ireland and there's more notoriously Luxembourg, to beat such tax havens.
So, well, just to put, thank you for that. I want to move on quickly. Just one other political news issue, tech political news, is this Colonial pipeline shutdown due to the hacking from a hacker group calling themselves DarkSide. One little development that came out in the last few hours is that a gentleman named Dmitry Alperovich, one of the foremost cybersecurity experts who co-founded the firm CrowdStrike, said his group believes that DarkSide enjoys he believes that DarkSide enjoys official protection in Russia. And then he has a quote saying that a ransomware group we believe is operating and likely harbored by Russia has shut down a company that is moving 45% of petroleum supplying the East Coast. It's a criminal. Is it a criminal act? Sure, he tweeted. So this comes from his tweet. Another cybersecurity expert, Brett Callow of MCSoft, told NBC News that an indication of the group's origins and that its software is designed to not work on computers whose default languages are Russian or several other Eastern European languages, meaning Cyrillic. So he says, dark side doesn't eat in Russia, Callow told CNBC. So the computers whose default are Russia is it? So they designed the hacking tool to not work on Russian systems. Interestingly, so yeah, why would that be? So, but as I was saying before, more subtle details will continue to emerge each day. That's kind of the most recent development. And while we have you on stage here, David, I wanted to pivot into China news, which you do such a fantastic job of helping us contextualize. I have a few headlines here that just happened in the past 24 hours. Alibaba's Ant Group, which you know a lot about, will let more users test the Chinese digital yuan. And I will tweet this article out. It's from CNBC, and essentially, in the last year, the People's Bank of China, which you also work with, has distributed several $1 million worth of digital yuan through an app that is connected with 6 major state-owned banks. My Bank, an online-only bank, which Ant owns 30% stake in, is now allowing some users to link their accounts to the Chinese digital currency app. State-backed Chinese, okay. And then Ant did not confirm the exact nature of its participation in the digital currency project, but said that along with My Bank, the group would be involved with trials and research around the digital yuan. And there's a photo of a little video even of how exactly the app works. So I'm going to tweet this from the Tech News Around the World Twitter account. But David, if you had any thoughts around how AliPay is now, in essence, partnering as part of the new digital yuan.
Well, I think the infrastructure they've built is obviously very significant, because before they started working with the PBOC on building the DCEP, what they've successfully done is create payment gateways all over the world right now, actually, because so many Chinese consumers that are traveling abroad have a very limited credit limit on credit cards. So the best payment method for them is actually through AliPay, since it's linked directly to their bank accounts. And building on top of that, the DCEP system is actually a brilliant solution, right? Because you have your entire cross-border gateway already set up, and then you're building the digital currency on top of that structure. Mm-hmm. So at the same time, I almost think that's part of why Beijing had to take down Jack Ma as well, right? Because with such a powerful cross-border payment structure in their hands,
yeah,
I can't imagine any country, any sovereign, even if it weren't China, giving that amount of power to one single company.
Yeah, to that point, I'm in Thailand, and Thailand, 2 years ago, before COVID, Thailand's biggest tourism is China on a percentage basis. 2 years ago, Thailand was not really digital at all in terms of spending. It was entirely cash for the most part, with one very notable exception, which was Ant Financial's AliPay and WeChatPay. So the Chinese tourists that came here were able to pay digitally, but local Thai people were not paying digitally 2 years ago. Only Chinese tourists were. That was very interesting that these Chinese fintech apps were working in Thailand outside of China. I found that very curious as an American, because Google Wallet's not here. Even Samsung Pay wasn't here. Like, none of the other global kind of fintech companies, even the big ones, were not working here, but the Chinese ones were. And I imagine that made the Chinese government a bit nervous in some sense. And then, as you said, well, as this article reads from CNBC, Ant and AliPay's increased involvement with the digital yuan comes despite increased scrutiny from Chinese regulators on Ant Financial's AliPay. Authorities abruptly suspended the Ant Financial massive IPO in November, and last month regulators said Ant would restructure as a financial holding company, kind of dismantling its momentum, and now it's working as a tool for the new state-backed digital currency. Kind of an interesting change of plans as it is.
Tyler.
Yeah.
So those AliPay and WeChatPay, even when they are overseas, are targeting mainly at the Chinese spenders, because I have those, but I can't use it overseas because I don't have their Chinese ID, the 人民认证. So and also I understand from my Chinese friends that there is a daily limit, so it's still kind of controlled about the spending. Yes, Monica, I have a news, I think.
I was just going
Sorry,
to.
can I get in here to give a bit of an update to what Cheryl just said, please?
Yeah, Kai, go ahead.
Yeah, it's Kai. So Cheryl is correct, but that's in the past. And I just talked with Alipay recently. They have a London office now. So Alipay is actually very different from WeChatPay. WeChatPay is very much very Chinese, but Alipay on the other hand has made a lot of international acquisitions and investment. And Alipay is
Kai, we can't hear you. Are you in the golf course again? We are losing you, Kai.
That's okay. If somebody want to have a point there on
Yeah,
Maybe David knows.
I think what Kai is trying to say, which is actually Alipay has been on the forefront in bringing foreigners into the fold for using their platforms, and they've been making aggressive acquisitions around the world for payment gateways. In fact, what I think is quite interesting about them is they effectively have a similar payment portal service as PayPal now. So credit card gateways and processing beyond Chinese users and beyond Chinese Union Pay. So with that ability, they're actually able to act as their own clearance settlement house as well. So Tyler, as you know, when
hello.
you're hi.
Hello.
Hey, Kai.
Did you lose me?
Yeah.
Yep, totally.
Oh, sorry. I said a lot when I was driving, so maybe the signal here. So I just want to say that I actually talked with Alipay very recently. So they are very international. They make a lot of international acquisition. And Ants Group would be working with a lot of international product and content makers. They're going to have very sophisticated marketing engine. So I think they would benefit consumers and enterprise in a lot of countries to actually go quickly into the digital financial economy of present in China, but still tomorrow, hopefully soon tomorrow, in a lot of countries. I think this will also push companies like PayPal to be more aggressive in terms of product development. So that's a good thing. So I just want to add that. Sorry that the signal is not very good.
Yeah.
And,
I think Monica has a PayPal news.
Okay. Yeah.
No, I.
Linda, who works in fintech in the audience in Sweden, says even in Stockholm, the luxury brand stores accept WeChat and Alipay, all the way in Sweden, where they don't even get that many Chinese tourists, relatively. Sorry, Monica, go ahead.
Tyler, I was just going to say that Alipay, I agree with Kai's point about Alipay doing something very differently. They're actually extending their footprint even in Africa, which is going very unnoticed, but they're doing it at the back of certain acquisitions or investments, like in Paytm, parent company, which is called 197. Which is in India. I think, again, very much under the radar. It doesn't attract a lot of attention. However, I think in this particular instance, there's been a very interesting article from Bloomberg yesterday, which also mentions that merchants have been offering a 10% discount on using the digital yuan. And yet consumers are not willing to take the bait because the merchant accepting locations for CBDC in China is very, very low. And that is why the Chinese government probably is forcing Alipay and WeChatPay into the fold, because they would be able to get almost every single merchant in China if they started accepting digital yuan. And secondly, consumers are really worried about their own privacy, because they know that the government will now be able to track every single dollar, every single renminbi that they are spending. And this is a primary concern for them, because right now all the transactions that were happening were within a closed loop ecosystem of Alipay and WeChat Pay with no visibility to the Chinese government. So
Oh.
these were the two main pieces that were cited yesterday. It's a very interesting article that must be read, though, in conjunction with
Can you
what you were
DM it
saying.
to me so I can share it in the
Yes,
Twitter account, please?
I will do that right away.
Thanks.
So,
So
so
just
Tyler,
add a little
Tyler,
more
just
can I
going
add the
back.
context,
perspective,
Let's go to
if I may?
Mabwana and then David. Thanks. Go Mabwana.
Yeah, I was gonna confirm what both Kai and Monica were saying, because there was one time about 2 years ago I checked into a hotel that used to be a Swiss owned, then it was magically Chinese owned. In the check-in line, half the guests were Chinese, and of course they took Alipay, right?
Yeah.
And then also Alipay has built integration with M-Pesa, which is the biggest mobile money integration in East Africa. Biggest mobile money service in East Africa, and I believe Kenyans can buy off Alibaba to import any goods. You can even bring them in pretty effectively, I think 1-2 weeks. And so, yeah, like you're seeing an interesting layer built by the Chinese on the payment side that not only isn't just the infrastructure, but also integrating into the hotels. Because, of course, Chinese tourists are rising and the number of Chinese investors are rising in Africa. And so it makes total sense.
Mm-hmm. Oh, the hotel you're speaking of was in Kenya?
Yeah, it used to be a Swiss hotel that I had spent some time, before. Then suddenly, this often happens. You show up one day and you're like, new owner. It's owned by the Chinese, right? Because they're investing in Africa.
Yeah.
And it has Chinese guests and they take Alipay.
Right.
So there's that aspect, but also enabling Chinese African merchants or Kenyan merchants to be able to trade into China, whether it's buying goods, is also another big thing, right? So of course we get a lot of Chinese imports into Africa. So that's another aspect of where Alipay integration with M-Pesa shows that. I'm not sure if it's totally visible to the Chinese government, some of these, because I don't know how they pay taxes and register all those payments if it's a Kenyan hotel. But it just shows how they're working in sync to extend the Chinese influence all the way into Africa.
Thanks for
No,
that.
but actually, my question is Mawan. How do you pronounce? Sorry,
Mabwana.
Magwana. Sorry.
Bona.
You can't. Can you have an Alipay account in Africa and pay using Alipay? No, right?
As an
No,
African.
and so that's the
Yeah.
key. The key is that I can use my mobile money wallet M-Pesa in Kenya to send payments through Alipay. So there's an integration built, and I believe the startup that did that was called Flutterwave, which is like one of the newest unicorns in Africa.
That's
I
right,
don't
out
think
of Nigeria. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you could do pretty well as an African fintech, helping to integrate Chinese payment services into Africa, because it is a significant trade. Versus like say PayPal, right? As we were talking before, like PayPal is the other side, right? Which they also has their own.
In fact, in Japan, SoftBank is working with them like many years back already, because SoftBank owns part of Alipay, right?
Correct.
So that is
They own part of Ali.
correct.
Wait. They own a big part of Alibaba.
Yeah. So my question is, because I have Alipay and WeChat Pay, but that I actually created those when I was in traveling in China, because I also have a Bank of China account, but I can't use it in Japan because I don't have the ID. So that's my question. Right now I still have money in there. So I just now I got a clue, maybe because I can just shop on the Chinese site, and then ask them to send the goods to me in Japan.
Right.
Maybe that's a good idea.
David Cheng, you were saying.
Right. So they're doing rollouts. So if you have a Hong Kong ID, for example, and you get a Hong Kong account, you can enjoy the full suite of services abroad as well. And then they're slowly rolling out to different countries. But I want to really talk about the infrastructure of cross-border payments. So if everyone thinks about making a credit card purchase transaction overseas. So for example, if I'm flying down to Thailand and staying at Tyler's hotel, and I swipe my credit card, there's actually a few different layers. So first of all, if I swipe a Visa or MasterCard, there's the actual Visa MasterCard processing platform. On top of that, there's what's called a credit card acquirer. Usually the credit card acquirer is a bank. And then on top of the credit card acquirer are oftentimes what's called payment service providers. So usually when you are a online service, for example, you deal with a payment service provider, and then they go and deal on behalf for you with a bank that's the credit card acquirer, and then that bank then deals with Visa or MasterCard. And that's why as a merchant you're paying, up to 3% of what your customer is paying you, because it's getting split between the PSP, the acquirer, and Visa Master. But what Alipay has successfully done is they've built a system that's integrated all three elements into their platform. So they actually have their own processing platform, just like Visa and Master, and that's what swiping your QR code and paying with Alipay is. But if you do want to pay with a credit card, they can also provide you the two layers on top, which is the merchant acquisition service, the PSP, and then also the credit card acquirer service. So that's why they're busy acquiring all these different platforms globally, because for those who can't use the Alipay indigenous platform or aren't using Visa or MasterCard, they have to buy up the local payment system. And then they integrate that on top with their credit card acquiring system or their payment service provider platform.
Thanks for that.
Hey, Tyler.
Yeah. Yes?
I have a question for David.
Okay.
Hey, David, I just had a quick question. I know you used the word
Sure.
remittance, right? But I think the other thing that you said was, Alipay also working with a lot of PSPs and doing merchant acquiring and payments being settled to those PSPs, right? So from what I understand, remittance is different and, settling into a merchant account is different. So maybe if you could just clarify that.
Sure. I said they are the PSP themselves, but they would work with on-the-ground companies to do merchant acquisition, right? And then in terms of remittance, they are actually able to remit, not possibly not everywhere in the world, but in the countries that they are currently servicing, they're actually able to remit the money to your account. So, for example, if you're a merchant, say in Sweden, right, like what Tyler was saying earlier, and the Chinese clients come to you and pay you with an Alipay, they're actually able to do settlement in T+2 days, so within 48 hours now. And then the actual amount of time that it takes to bridge the actual money movement is actually credited by Alipay itself. So the bank settlement might take, I don't know, say a week or 2 weeks, right? But Alipay will actually bridge the merchant for that amount of time.
Interesting.
Right. So this money in Sweden, Alipay bank account stays in Sweden, or it gets transferred to China, is what you're saying?
So Alipay is the one who remits the money to the Swedish account of the Swedish vendor, but the settlement between the client's bank account and Alipay will actually take much longer, right? So that part is being done within China, because it's obviously a Chinese client who's using the Alipay account to pay for it.
Can I,
So
Donna,
Sure.
so go ahead.
I wanted to ask a question. You mentioned T+2 in the settlement. Two questions relating to that. One is PayPal with its ability now to an expanding ability to use crypto, or the Chinese CBDC going to change this T+2, or that's embedded into the way it works?
So I know PayPal is actually able to do T+0 now, but I don't necessarily think that's all powered by crypto, because for very granular transactions, crypto might actually be too expensive, right? If you transfer something on the ERC20 network for USDT, for example, that like minimum cost is like $15. So I don't think that's possible for granular transactions. But in terms of what CBDC is trying to accomplish, I think that would require a cooperation with the local central bank, right? Because that would be kept in the local central bank's foreign reserve, whereas what Alipay is doing right now is circumventing all of those and doing a direct remittance to the vendor. And I guess that's part of why it's such a threat to the Chinese state.
And then Linda is making the point that there's probably is some fees for the alley, and that's why it's kind of the use case is currently on the luxury goods and whatnot, because it's worth it in that case to pay whatever fees that they might have.
Well,
Tyler?
actually, Ali would probably be cheaper than most credit card merchants, most credit card processing services. I think for a small merchant like Tyler, I don't know how much you're paying your guy, but usually it's going to be about
Right.
3% for a small merchant, right?
Right.
And AliPay will charge you less than 2% for the merchant because, like I said, they've integrated all three services into their own platform.
Cool.
Yep.
Very cool.
When
Tyler?
we're looking at the Southeast Asian landscape, we're seeing that with regard to mobile money, which is more adopted than cards in Southeast Asia, whether you're looking Myanmar, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, Philippines, Vietnam, in all of these countries, there is an investment from Alipay into one of the wallets, and there's a competitive investment from Tencent into another of the wallets, so that they ensure acceptance, as David was explaining.
Very
So
cool.
they're already far integrated there.
I want to, Heyman,
Sure.
if you can kind of close us out on China. I want to move over to India, but
Yeah,
go ahead,
that'll be
Heyman.
perfect. Actually, that's perfect because I found an article that's about Macau. Because Chinese digital yuan is basically being designed, according to this article, I'll forward it to you, is being designed so that the flight of money from China is monitored. And what they're planning to do is also ban Chinese residents from participating in any other casinos besides Macau. So that's a way for them
Because the
to
casinos can function in some sense
money launder.
as a kind of laundering mechanism. Yeah.
Right. So what they're doing is in Macau, they will be establishing the digital yuan from the player end to all the way up to the corporate end.
Funny.
And
Yeah,
they're going
they have to do the whole stack because if they don't do the
right.
whole thing, it could slip through the cracks. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's the plan right now. And they're going to ban their own citizens from participating in any other gaming locations. They're going to
Funny.
blacklist them.
That's
They can
funny.
come to Singapore.
Yeah. Even in Korea, the Korean in Seoul, there's a casino next to the W Hotel, but the Koreans can't use it, but non-Koreans can. Funny.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's, I'm sure there's several folks, Hong Kongers very notably, getting itchy around the financial future of things as the digital yuan kind of takes, further strengths, which we've been following each day. It's interesting to see how it develops on a day-by-day basis. So thank you for helping us with that, David. You being
Pleasure.
intimately familiar with it. It's a really unique benefit to the group here. So moving to India, I know Raghav, you had an article about Flipkart, India's big e-commerce delivery company.
Yeah, there's an article on TechCrunch that says Flipkart is in talks to raise $1 billion, an additional $1 billion ahead of their IPO, which is interesting for a number of reasons. Obviously, like Flipkart's had a much better year, because of like the pandemic than they were anticipating, and they've also had like a huge cash injection, I think 2 years ago, which was like around $16 billion.
Yeah.
But it's also it's also somewhat strange because this is a company that's taken in a lot of capital and not been able to pull the return that the investors have been looking for. So,
but the really interesting paragraph in this TechCrunch article. It says several major investors of Flipkart declined to comment on the fundraiser. It's at a $30 billion valuation pre-IPO. They sold a majority stake to Walmart for $16 billion a couple years ago. But here's the really interesting line. 11 Indian startups have turned unicorn this year, more than half of them in the last month, as high-profile investors, including Tiger Global, double down on the world's second largest internet market, which is exactly right, and is exactly why I'm itching to get over there, because having banned 170 Chinese apps, there's now an incredible opportunity to fill in those gaps with local Indian founded companies that will need lots of financing and fundraising to grow into future unicorns. And I would love to participate in that and do a syndicate for my friends in the Nordics and California. My Lord, India's unicorn future looks very bright indeed. But unfortunately, there's a bit of COVID is still going on, and I haven't been vaccinated. So that idea will have to wait for the time being. But thank you for that.
I've heard there's plenty of Sinovac vials you can get, Tyler.
Yeah, not in Thailand at the moment. We're in the process now of everyone registering at their local hospitals, which I need to do tomorrow, in fact. But is there Akil is not with us at the moment, or does anyone else have Ushbinder? Maybe you have a Indian headline you'd like to share. Anyone have something from India they'd like to share? No,
Sure.
we can move on.
Hi, Tyler. I have something to share if I
Go
can.
ahead.
Yeah, so I think one of the points that was discussed in India today, and I don't know if this was already discussed in the in the room, was one was again on remittance that we spoke recently about. So now Google Pay users in the US can actually remit money to Google Pay users in India, which is
That's
huge,
right. I saw
right?
this
And
headline, and that's huge for Indians. Yeah, based in the
it,
U.S. and with family back home and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, remittance in India, I stand to be corrected, right, is about 2.5 to 3% of the GDP, right? So we're
Oh
looking at
my
about,
God.
we're talking about anywhere close to 90 to 100 billion US dollars, right?
Oh my God.
And US, I think is, if not the, no, I think the
That's
first
gotta
is,
that's gotta be on a country basis the largest in the world. Yeah.
uh,
You
yes,
mean
I
for
mean,
Indians?
you mean for
I mean,
Indians,
like,
right?
Well, yeah, of course for Indians, but I mean, how much is remittance into China? Because how many Chinese are living
oh,
internationally to
from
send money
Chinese that
back
are
to China?
outside. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but
No, I'm
Indians
sure.
living around the world sending money back to India, that's, like you said, it's nearly 3% of the GDP of India.
Yeah, that's 2.5 to 3% of the GDP, right?
Wow.
And I think the last numbers that I know, while the aspirations are to become a $5 trillion economy, right? But we still around 2.75 to 3 trillion dollar economy. And I think the remittances from, I think I'm not sure whether US comes first or it's the UAE, but I know it's between these two, which are the top two places where the remittances come from. So this is huge, right? I mean, I think the use case that Google is going after and the investments that they make in India continues to be phenomenal, apart from, I think, the social impact that they do on the COVID and the vaccine. So that was one tech news coming out of India. And quickly, a second one, which again was discussed with a few friends today, was the Biden administration reopening the foreign entrepreneur visa, right, which is the startup visa. I think that's what they
Right.
call in the US.
Right.
So that was also discussed a lot. I'm not sure how much of value that's brought, because there was a lot of discussion saying that this was shot down a couple of years ago.
Yeah, Trump shut that down. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that was another headline that came up today, on the tech side, the startup visa being opened up for everybody out of the US.
Yeah. But that was huge for Indians and Chinese, especially when the Bay Area was still the real dominant. All of the big tech companies in the Bay Area. If you drive around, the south part of the Bay Area, Fremont and Sunnyvale and Cupertino. I mean, Cupertino, you know, it's the best Chinese food you'll find anywhere is in Cupertino. It's like you feel like it's a quite an expansive Chinatown. And then Fremont as well. You have a huge mix of Indian and the Chinese that work at Intel, and they cross the Dunbar Bridge over to work at the big tech companies every day. I mean, there's people outside of Silicon Valley don't realize just how huge the Indian and Chinese populations are around Silicon Valley that work at the big tech companies. And you go to the big tech companies at lunchtime, and you would be forgiven for wondering, if you're in India or if you're in China or where exactly are you? Yeah. I mean, that's partly due to these visas, which, Trump was proactive about ending, which, the big tech companies didn't like, of course. And of course, a lot of people, the Indian and Chinese folks working there didn't like that either. But I think the big tech companies, if they had one wish, it would be to change that to some degree. And maybe Biden is giving them that. But I wanted to move back to U.S. things. Justin, you had speaking of
But
Biden.
just before that, Tyler,
Yeah.
I got curious about these remittances, right? So
Yeah.
I just looked something up just very quickly. So India is about 2.8, right, percent of GDP.
Yeah.
China's 0.5,
Yeah,
surprisingly, and Mexico's 3.1.
Yeah.
Philippines, you'd expect
Yeah.
9.8,
Yeah.
right? It's a very interesting number
Yeah.
actually to look
Mexico's
at.
ginormous because of the U.S. border. In living in San Diego as I did most of my life, I'm intimately familiar with that. But I
And
mean,
Ukraine, 11.8.
oh,
Wow.
huge, yeah, because the Ukrainians don't want to live in Ukraine because it's the cost. It's just you can't make any substantial money there. You have to get out and go to London or whatever, and they send the money back home. Yeah, but in terms of actual, not percentage basis, but actual total amount, I think India must be the highest at 3% of India.
Yeah, at 82 billion. Yeah, it's the
Yeah, it's
highest. And then China,
huge.
70 billion,
Yeah,
Mexico, 38.
yeah. So
Very
India's
interesting.
number one.
Very
Yeah, that's
interesting statistic, actually.
yeah.
Tells a
Um,
lot.
let's do Justin. You had
Hey,
speak.
Tyler.
Yes, Dan.
Yeah, so do you have music for unbreaking news?
I do, but hold on. I no. Oh, you want to take back the Standard Charter headline?
Did you guys talk about that already?
No.
Nope.
Okay, so last night or whatever time at the previous time zone,
Yeah.
I mentioned that Standard Charter had the bank had announced that it was going to eliminate coal funding by the
Cool
end of
subsidy.
this year and all fossil fuel funding by I think the end of 2023. That turns out to be a prank on the bank by the Friday for Future. So basically, the Greta Thunberg's,
Oh,
not
funny.
her, she didn't do it, but the group that supports her, put out that press release and had a very funny press conference today or yesterday, whatever it was, about this. And the whole thing was a big joke, which of course puts more pressure on them in the first place because it highlights the fact that they are being so hypocritical on climate stuff because they claim that they're all for doing something, but they're still funding coal
Yeah.
plants.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that is an unbreaking news story.
Yeah.
Yes.
Luckily, Stella was not there when
Yeah,
that
but
was
it
announced.
is a bit of news that the Friday for Future have employed kind of their own PR tactics to get
Oh yeah,
attention. Yeah.
yeah.
Funny evolvement that they're getting into the PR game. Justin, when we were speaking of Biden, you had a Biden headline.
Yeah, I did, and I think that this will be interesting to everybody. It is breaking news right now, today.
Oh, hang on. Okay,
Music,
there we go.
please.
From the New York
Folks, you can only
Times.
get
Yeah.
this. You can only get this in the tech news around the world, where you get breaking news on politics being explained by somebody who's worked in the field to a bunch of people who actually know what the heck the topic is about. So
Right.
this is great.
Shameless plug-in.
Well done.
So click that little greenhouse up top, give the club a follow. But on that note, this is a New York Times article saying semiconductor makers and users form a group to push for chip funding. So there's a few important things here. I'm going to lay them out in the standards of threes, and then we can kind of get into it a little bit more. So yesterday, I brought up the fact that cryptocurrency is beginning to lobby the U.S. government, and one of the problems is the companies within the industry, my dog's upset. They don't even see eye to eye, right? So it makes it more difficult. But this is an example of U.S. big industry all agreeing on one path forward, and therefore they're maximizing their influence. So what you have here, so that's point one. Point two is this plays into the U.S. China industrial kind of, I don't know if you want to call it war or détente, but it's the U.S. beginning to position themselves for the future. And then number three, it relates, it's the biggest tech thing related to Biden's infrastructure spending bill. So what's going on here is there's a new group called the Semiconductors in America Coalition, and its members include chip makers like Intel, NVIDIA, and Qualcomm, along with companies that rely on semiconductors, Apple, Google, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft, Verizon, and AT&T. So that's a lot of heft and power and influence. Now, what they are doing is they are lobbying the U.S. government and specifically Congress to include at least $50 billion in government funding for semiconductor research and manufacturing in Biden's transportation bill. And the other reason why that this is super duper duper important is because we just were talking about high taxes to start off the show. And like I said, companies like Amazon have lobbied in favor of high taxes because they believe it's in the best interest of economic growth. And this is another example of that. This $50 billion would come from taxpayers, and the result would be it improves US infrastructure, and it not only helps out the companies making these chips, but also the companies creating the products that these chips are used in. So I think that there's a lot to unpack here. We can take it from the U.S.-China angle. We could take it from the government sector supporting the tech sector, or we could take it from a wholly different angle, whichever Tyler and Carl in the audience so choose.
Yeah, it's the America realizes and has woken up to the realization that semiconductors are now the blood of everything. And without them, there was a headline yesterday. I'm just going to do it from memory, that car manufacturers are removing some of their smart car features, like the smart rear view mirror features, because they require chips that they're having a very hard time getting access to. And rather than stop production on that particular car, they just are going to rip out that particular, function or feature of that car that requires that chip, because they have no confidence that they're going to be able to get that chip. So you're almost seeing like the unsmartification of some of these cars. I think you're going to see the same in other areas where chips become very critical in the production or the supply chain, so that there's less dependency on them. Otherwise, you're going to stop. Full production lines will have to come to a grinding halt, as some have done. I mean, the Neo car in China said about a month ago that they were stopping production precisely for this reason. But the U.S. had their big emergency meeting at the White House, and they pulled everyone together. They understand fundamentally this is an existential threat to some very large players like the car companies, and to name one of more. There's more than just them, and they need to invest heavily and now. And because this can have domino effects if they don't address it with the seriousness it deserves. And this is not a U.S. specific issue. This is a global issue. Anywhere where you've got, digitized societies like Japan, my God, and China as well is doing everything they can to become self-sufficient, and it's a huge focus for the whole planet.
And another thing, Tyler, is this represents, so it will get Republican, it will get Democrat support. And people who are ignorant of U.S. politics love to condemn the U.S. government for not looking ahead. But anybody who works in the semiconductor industry will be able to tell you that $50 billion of investment is not something that happens tomorrow, and then the next day you have all of these fobs that are created and the production lines are just produced. So I think the other angle here is the U.S. government and policymakers and also the private sector are beginning to entrench in a longer term strategy to kind of lay out the foundation of how to approach growing China. And that really is, we're going to have a congressman on who's going to discuss this, but that really is the basis of this strategy, is to really increase the U.S. economic production and capacity, specifically in the tech sector. So don't view this as like a one-off investment from the United States government. This is going to be kind of the norm moving forward in critical industries.
Yeah, but this touches on. We did a poll a couple weeks ago, Cal. You might remember the numbers, where we said, would you be willing to pay, 10%, 15% more if your goods were made in the U.S. or out of China or whatever? And it seemed overwhelmingly that people were in favor of willing to pay the extra cost for that. I think Apple's done those polls as well, and a lot of the big tech companies have, and I think you're starting to see Apple specifically trying to do more in the U.S. and outside of China. And along for technological reasons, it's like it's a little dicey being so dependent even on Taiwan for all of the chips. But thankfully, one of the headlines last week was Taiwan's TSMC is even going headstrong into producing into the U.S., which is I think kind of a win-win. But it's hard to emphasize just how important and the scale of all of this with Apple, Intel, TSMC, everyone doubling down, tripling down on U.S.
There's a
based
couple
production.
of them.
Yeah,
there's a couple of important subtleties here.
Okay.
So one, I've been looking deeply into my semiconductor contacts in the auto industry in particular, and it turns out that some of this was self-inflicted. They cut down their orders.
Right, due to
These are the
COVID,
types
yeah.
of things that, yeah, these are the types of things that you can't just, turn. It's fabrication facilities. You can't turn these things on a dime. And to Justin's point, it's great what the U.S. is doing now and I think it will be bipartisan because it's existential. But the other subtlety here is that there were people saying that something like this could happen without predicting COVID, without predicting any of these things. There have been people who have been saying, why are we so okay with single sourcing geopolitically? Why are we okay with this on certain components that are clearly the lifeblood of everything that we do today as a modern society? We're relying more and more on them, and we're effectively single sourced. And so the fact that this is all after the fact, kind of retrospective, fixing things when they're clearly broken. I'm glad that we're now doing a little bit of forward looking, and we're not going to take we're not going to take our foot off the gas. But I also think we could have been better prepared for this if we had listened to the smart voices in the room instead of purely following this, like, well, it's cheap, so let's do it, kind of strategy that these companies have been following.
Yeah, there's
But
also
also to add to that,
1 second. I just had a burning thought. Pardon me. Forgive me. With Justin here and Greg here, do we think that as much as Biden is in favor of this and it makes economic sense, yada yada yada, it also removes some of the wind in the sails of Trump coming back and pushing strong on this point? It kind of disarms what would normally be one of his weapons, and one of his arguments is, we need to do this and be strong on this point about China and et cetera, et cetera. And Biden can be like, yeah, we did that. You know what I mean?
So yeah, it does. It does, but what I've learned in political messaging, when you are specifically from the opposition party, it doesn't really matter whether what you're saying is true or not based on our information ecosystem. And I think that he will be able to continue to blame China for the pandemic and the lockdowns and paint things in a way with the increasing influence that China's having overseas. He'll still use the same rhetoric. It may not be, as charged or as effective if Biden was like pro-China, for example, and removed the tariffs. So for people in the audience, Biden has actually kept a lot of the tariffs that were imposed under Trump on China, which I think also goes to Tyler's point. But really, to put a fine point on this, yes, Tyler, you're right, but I think it will still be an effective line of attack. Well, I kind of agree. I think the most effective line is the one that is sort of true, which is that Trump was talking about this China issue, regardless of the fact that he talked about it like he talked about it in the most ham-fisted way possible, and in a way that I don't totally agree with. But the way that, like, I might actually vote for Trump in 2024. That's breaking news, I know. But the reason that I would do it is if he comes in and he says, well, yeah, I've been harping on this China issue for a long time, and also I'm going to get a clue about healthcare. And I know that we were totally clueless about it before, but here's what our actual plan is, then he might actually get my vote. Because I think Biden is kind of doing what he has to do here. It's retrospective. It's nice. I don't want to, I want to do it. You have my support. Biden and Kamala and everybody and all the Democrats and all the Republicans that want to solve this problem that has been here for many years before the black swan event of COVID. If you want to start solving it now, I'm all on board, but I'm not going to give you credit for discovering it and solving it sooner, and solving it before it became a problem. Yeah, I think that the rhetoric might actually be successful because there's some truth behind it, that they're patching this up after it's already broken down, after many years of having a service, like servicing the problem. And I'm no fan of big tech in this fiasco. They created this problem, and now being a part of fixing it is kind of cold comfort. I want people who stop the problem before it happens because they have a modicum of looking ahead and seeing where these things are going to fall. before they actually become catastrophes like they've become right now.
Yep. Inviting up Lamas and Ben Wan, and let's get Eric up here. Let's see what Eric wants to chime in with. And Dr. Alexi has been waiting. Alexa, sorry. So just inviting some new folks up here. And we went through, for those who are just joining us now, doing a room reset now as a lot of people pouring into the room. We did cover a bit of China and India, and now we're getting into the political discussion, as we often do each day. We still have VR and green tech, medtech, AI, fintech, and crypto to jump into. On the VR front, there is right now, literally this hour, some big news. The HTC ViveCon live streaming event just started, and we have our resident VR expert, Victoria, is over there, probably with Michael as well. He's a VR nut himself. And they're watching the live stream, and they've created a separate companion room to analyze that as it happens. And I've told them to DM Cal and I and others to let us know when the live stream, turns interesting, so that we can let people here know to go jump over there and join that live stream discussion. And we can anticipate that in the next 30 minutes or so. And they plan
Tyler,
to, yeah,
real quick.
Yeah.
I am always a little bit disappointed too when all tech discussions end up being politics discussions. But I had this realization this morning that in the 80s and 90s, we moved towards globalism, and we made tech a political discussion by nature. You can't talk about a tech company in and of itself.
Right.
Apple does not make these products. Foxconn and Apple and TSMC and the global supply chain, the likes of which even Apple doesn't have a full handle on these days, make the products. And so it makes it impossible to talk about tech without talking about politics. And it's fucking annoying because I used to talk about tech without talking about politics, and it was more fun.
Until relatively recently. And to unpack that, I have this thought often myself, which is tech started out as communication systems like blogs and tweets and shit like that. And then it became media like MP3 files and MP4 files and video files. And it used to be, if you lived in Hollywood, it was a lot of talk about tech because, it was
and you used to be able to build a computer in your garage from scratch.
Right. But
and now you can't.
Right. But then tech got to a certain point where one day, magically, about a few years ago, the data got so important, and the government magically woke up to how important the data is to them. And China might have been one of the first to realize it. Japan in some ways, Sweden certainly did, America did, and now the governments definitely understand how important all of this data is going through these cell phone networks, for example, which Snowden really blew the whistle on all of that. And then it's been kind of a government woke up to the importance of tech, and the data of tech has now bled into nearly everything.
And now literally a guy on the East Coast can't buy gas because the Colonial pipeline was shut down by ransomware. And it's like this did not, it used to be people, whistling into a telephone and making a free long distance call. And now it is just intrinsic to everything that we do. And when people fuck around with it, it becomes geopolitics really quickly. And so I now make no apologies for being the way that I am and advocating for the things that I do, because now the world is technology and geopolitics is one of the components.
Yeah.
Greg, in terms of that ransomware, Bloomberg said that it's not the ransomware that actually stopped it. He says ransomware got into a back office system, and because of that, they didn't know what was going to happen, so they shut it off. Yeah.
No, I'm familiar, but this is what happens when you don't understand your own infrastructure. But believe it or not, I have been personally affected by ransomware in that, this is not a joke. My helicopter was in the shop for a year because Garmin got attacked by ransomware. And it was literally perfectly flyable, but illegal to fly because they couldn't get their shit together to do the paperwork. It's creating real economic destruction, the likes of which that we don't even fully understand the full numbers. And it has become political. And I basically think that whoever did that, we should target a Scud missile right at the house of whoever did that and blow them and their families up, because they destroy things. And so I guess this has now become something where this is war. We need to treat it like what it really is.
And that includes and by the way, I'm afraid that our missiles won't work because we don't understand the technology going into them well enough either to make sure that they don't turn around and blow us up instead.
That's a good poll
Oh,
in and of itself that we could do is if the source of this pipeline hack is determined concretely
death by
without,
firing squad.
yeah, would
Yeah, like
would
sentenced to death
would
legally
would
after a fair trial.
yeah, it'd be interesting to see. Well, could it be, assuming they are not in America, then would it be grounds for strong
Yes.
military reaction? That would
And
be an
that's why I
interesting
might
poll.
vote for Trump in 2024 because Biden won't do it. He's letting himself be pushed around by all this stuff.
Well, because it's unprecedented politically, I think is
Yeah,
the
I mean, but
situation.
look, the YPLL measurement, the years of potential life lost of this pipeline shutdown, which was necessary because of a ransomware attack. Like, unless they're minors, I think that they should be, tried and basically brought up on the most on the highest charges that we could imagine, put away for life. If they actually inflicted, if it's manslaughter because it resulted in death, then perhaps they should be tried and have their lives taken away from them. And by the way, if it was done by a foreign country, I think we should exercise the full might of the U.S. military for an attack on our critical infrastructure. Like, it's just that simple.
That's the interesting thing is it almost feels like a warning, a teaser into something much darker to come, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
and we've got 78-year-old, nice grandpa who is not the person that we want to fight these fights.
Correct. This is Heyman in Toronto, but I think the hypocrisy would be called out too, right? Because I think the U.S. also has been
I don't care
doing
about
ransomware.
hypocrisy.
No, but technically,
I don't care.
that's what the whole point is in the whole stage right now, right?
I am a hypocrite and I don't care.
That's true, but the thing is, it actually will
No,
have
no,
a
no.
blowback.
Like everybody else needs to sit down. The U.S. is great. Like, we don't do sure, we've done bad things in the past,
Yeah.
but we're all trying to get better. And
Yes.
there is a greater good and a greater evil here, and we're not going to sit down and be shamed out of taking the right actions.
If we do, that's the problem. We
Yeah.
don't.
well, the
Yeah.
other thing is
Uh,
tech is not
But
only.
hypocrisy is not bad because hypocrisy is it's the thing that everybody trots out as to the reason why you shouldn't do something. And literally, someone's trying to kill you, and they say, "Don't defend yourself because you'll be a hypocrite." And I'm like, okay, well, I'd rather be alive and have people think that I'm a hypocrite than be dead and have people say that I was a nice, fair, gentle person.
So
by the way,
two.
to add to the news
Heyman,
stories,
hold on. Sorry,
yeah.
Heyman. So the Victoria, who's running the VR room, says that the HTC Vive Con live stream is getting to the juicy bit. So if that's of your
Ooh.
right in your wheelhouse and you're super excited about the future of VR, feel free to go over there. I'm trying. It's called the Metaverse Room, something along. Here it is. It's called the Metaverse Global VR AR News HTC ViveCon is the name of the room, and you'll see Victoria and Michael and Carl over there at the moment. So if VR is your kind of cup of tea, go over there. We've got another 37 minutes here, and then we're going to jump over and join them over there. Hopefully it won't be past all the juicy bits. But to this point that we're getting on this political data points, the tech has not only just gotten interesting to the governments, tech is going into the medical and education, and those are becoming political as well and can be weaponized as well by hackers and whatnot. So it gets social media itself has become sort of weaponized, as the FBI director and the director of the British intelligence have both said that they're both being used by state actors in nefarious ways, which who needs direct hand-to-hand combat when you can do this kind of subversive, psycho division and social media.
Yeah, have you ever heard of this guy Adrian Perica?
No.
Tyler?
No.
You don't know who Adrian Perica is?
How do you spell the last name?
Perica.
No.
So Adrian is actually the most powerful person at Apple. And by the way, I'm not the only one that thinks that.
Okay.
He spends a ton of time with Tim Cook. He acts like he's been at the company for the entire time, but he's actually ex-Goldman Sachs banker. And I'll tell you this, I'm not a conspiracy nut. I always look for
You know, I don't have slam dunk evidence because that's the very best conspiracies, right? would kind of be that way. But this guy acted like he was doing industrial espionage, in my opinion,
Well,
to keep
his title is corporate development, and corporate development can lead into corporate espionage. Yeah, because it's about
no, but I
information.
mean,
Yeah.
I mean, even on Apple itself, like this guy literally, I mean, his background is so strange, and why he has so much power at Apple. Literally, like I had to negotiate with him on a once a week basis just to do anything. And I'm like, well, wait a second. I thought you were the M&A guy,
Yeah.
and holding back things that would put us on a better footing geopolitically.
Yeah,
and I'm like, oh, okay, very interesting.
He studied at West Point and is on the board of Didi, which is the Uber of China, which is very interesting.
Yeah, come on.
Anyway, yeah, and formerly at Goldman Sachs, as you said.
ATX breaking news.
Okay, Paul, what do you got? Hold on one second.
Okay, not worth fanfare. Don't do that.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so Dell Med is working on an app to aid the homeless. As you know, the homeless are facing a big deadline in a few days where they're going to be swept off the streets. But Dell has blockchain technology that will allow secure storage of important documents so that they can get medical help, because most of the homeless, they don't have any ID, they don't have a driver's license or anything, you know. So this will allow like facial recognition. They can go to a hospital, get help, and all their records will be blockchained. It's an effort to help the health of the homeless community in Austin, which is a major issue right now. And I in a future show, I want to do a full deconstruction of Elon Musk on SNL, do a bit by bit deconstruction of it. You know, our homeboy or Holmes or homie he is now, since he lives in Austin. I get to do that. I hope.
Is that Austin slang that you're dropping here?
I think it's prison slang, but anyway, I'm borrowing it. Anyway, let's do that in a future show. Okay, let's deconstruct his SNL deal
and his ties to the Illuminati networks. Yeah,
I personally, I watched it, and I like Elon, but it seemed like he was really on drugs. Like I'm not kidding. Like I don't know if it was ecstasy or what, but he was doing this weird shoulder roll thing that he never does in person.
Could be ADD drugs. Is that his Asperger's though? He right away admitted to
nervous
having
tics.
Asperger's.
Yeah. I'll tell you this. I've spent many hours with him in boardrooms.
I think he was very nervous.
Yeah, he does. He is in person, and he was an investor.
He's very strange in person.
He gets very. I'll share something that just it's never been really captured on camera so much. Although you may have seen hints in it in the SNL. He was a board member in the startup I was at, and I was always had to present at the board meetings, and so we spent every 3 months we would spend a few hours together, almost a half a day together, and have lunch and everything. He has a big part of his personality, which is a very buck-toothed teenage geek who's not accepted by the other kids in the school, who kind of is awkwardly tall, lanky. Like that is still very deep in his psyche, that he was this awkward, ostracized geek. And it shows in a board meeting context where he'll sit with his head down, kind of nervous, like the other people don't accept him. And it has a sense of an insecurity to it, like a deep childlike insecurity of, but he knows he's smart, and but when he gets he's self-aware of that, and he combats that by intentionally tossing his head back and laughing loud, and he does make extreme efforts to overcome that. But there are moments when he just goes back to that kind of
the king of throwback head laughs is Bezos.
I've been in
for the same reasons.
Yep.
But I guess Tyler, my question to you is, because it sounds like you've spent more time around him than me for sure. Does he have Tourette's-like behavioral tics?
He has ticks, yeah,
Because
yeah. I mean, that's why I was
okay,
saying, like these deeply grained kind of subconscious behaviors and mannerisms, I guess is the word I was
because he
looking for.
doesn't show those during the Tesla
Tyler,
Right.
keynotes.
is he an alien?
No, I'll tell you what does seem alien about him though is when you're in a board meeting and you're calculating something about a future business decision. This part's really interesting. He's able to do something that seems unhuman and alien, which is, and it speaks to why he's able to land rockets, simultaneously, on a return, which is we were trying to figure out, for example, should we pivot the company away from the previous business into YouTube production and making, doing, because one of our other board members was his partner at PayPal. The CFO at PayPal is another South African guy named Roloff Botha. So Roloff and Elon Roloff and Elon are dear friends. They're both from South Africa. They were both CEO and CFO at PayPal, and they were both on our board, and they were in the same board meetings. And they're both geniuses, but in very different ways. Roloff, I can't speak highly enough about, but when Elon would say, okay, well, Roloff was also a board member at YouTube. And so when YouTube was thinking about monetizing and turning on monetization for the content creators, the same way that Clubhouse is doing right now, Roloff said, hey, well, why don't we become like the first proper professional content generator for YouTube, this other company that he's deeply invested in, a board member at. And so we did that. So that's why I can say I personally, my YouTube account was the first YouTube account to be the paid, YouTube creator. And because of our relationship through Roloff to YouTube. And when we started doing this, we had this was a calculated decision amongst the board. Should we do this? And Elon said, okay, how much does it cost to hire a video editor? Okay, it's $10 an hour. Okay, how many videos can they make per week? Okay, they can make 25 videos per week. Okay, how long is the average video? Okay, and he mathematically boiled it down to a physics formula that no human can really do, if you understand where I'm going with this. And he would crunch the numbers in his head and said, okay, yeah, let's go that way. On a Newtonian, Einsteinian X equals, algebraic equation, almost like even more complex than algebraic. It would be kind of, trigonomic. And it was like, there's no way he's actually calculating this out in real time here in the boardroom with, Roloff sitting right next to him, and everyone in the room is like, is this for real? Did you really just figure out if it makes sense to do this pivot mathematically on the back of a napkin? And he
I thought
did.
that everybody did that.
Yeah, and that exactly. And he's looking around like, well, I just figured out the answer. The answer is, 7. And the rest of the room's like, yeah, but that's not possible that you did that without a calculator, first of all, and let alone a spreadsheet. And he's like, yeah, no, I just did it. I figured it out. The answer is 7. And if you want to debate this, you're wrong. And that's the end of story. And let's take a lunch break, and we'll come back and then, force him to explain to the rest of the class how he came up with this. And
that was just you guys taking enough time to figure out that it was right.
Right. Yeah.
It was the rightest thing that you could get to, actually.
Right.
It's not really right,
yeah.
but it's the rightest thing that you could get to if you're looking for objective criteria.
Yeah, but when people ask, is he an alien, that's where it does get a little alien, that ability of base principles.
Some of that,
yeah, and building
you
up
do enough mental math as a kid, and
exactly,
and it's not that big of a deal.
right.
What did you spend time on when you were a kid?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
So
falling off of skateboards.
Show, on a future show, we're gonna break it down, the SNL. We don't have time today, but I'd really like to break down what went down on that show. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
And why
imagine that you like doing mental math as much as some kids like jacking off.
Yeah.
and then you kind of understand what happens here.
Yeah, but the nervous tick, to your point, Paul, is he does have nervous tics, and he does have that childhood nervousness, kind of insecurity complex that he does have to overcome on camera. But over the years, he's gotten much better at it. Anyway, so
he did mention he has he's the first host of SNL with the Asperger syndrome.
Yeah, a lot of people made note of that. Yeah.
Stacey was talking about that actually. The goalposts on Asperger's and autism and all of that have moved in
So I'm actually glad he said it.
Yeah,
But the
lot of people are.
goalposts have
Yeah,
moved so much that essentially like a large enough portion of us are now Asperger's that it is no longer like a category that is truly
stigmatized. Yeah,
neurodivergent,
yeah.
and it's not stigmatized anymore. That's right. So it's easy. Like it's like he wasn't the first person to say it was Asperger's, but good for him for realizing the moment that he was in.
Yeah, to not to not be so to kind of be proud about it on stage was, I think, was the interesting moment. For those who really
Yeah.
want to get a insider's look, my partner Jason accompanied Elon to the Saturday Night Live taping in New York. So if you go to Jason's Twitter account, you can see behind the scenes shots with Chris Rock and the cast and crew, and driving around the Tesla truck around New York City and whatnot. His Twitter account is at Jason, and he has both on Twitter and on Instagram. And that was Jason and I did that startup, and obviously him and Elon are still very, very close. So he flew with Elon to New York and spent a week, a few days in New York.
Seriously, he did such a great job. I don't think people understand how hard it is to do as good of a job as he did. He did a great job compared to some actors that spend their entire lives being good at only acting. And so, the level of good that you have to be that funny on that show at this time, it's so good. Like my hat is off to him. I hope when I grow up that I'll be like Elon someday.
He's good at landing.
Except for all the divorces.
Yeah, I just wish Grimes would have been the musical guest. That would have been fun.
Did you notice, Tyler, that Jason actually tweeted the night before not to buy Dogecoins? So you
I'm
know
not
the
going to get
insight
into it.
there.
I know too much.
Exactly.
You're getting too close to.
That was the Mother's. That was the Mother's
Do
Day
the
gift
hustle.
to his
Dun, dun,
mother.
dun, dun, dun,
Yes.
dun, dun, dun. Do the hustle.
Yeah. It's yeah. Often there's conversations that go on in this room where I got to bite my tongue from time to time. But
Hey Tyler, I have a quick
yeah,
question.
yeah.
So you're saying about the you were he's Tyler Elon was the board member and about insecurity. You know, I'm curious. How did he manifest the insecurity to someone like you who presumably were sort of a stranger at the beginning when you met
Yeah.
him? Which is that he was a board member for for God's sake. I can understand him being evaluated as a founder or being socially awkward in a school or something. But now that he sits there,
Yeah.
and he's in the room
Yeah.
where he is the board member,
Yeah.
presumably. I don't know whether he was an investor or not. So
Yeah.
he
He
would
was.
wield
Yeah.
all the powers. Can you just,
Yeah.
how were you able to tell that he still manifested a
Well,
bit of a
just physically,
insecurity?
he'll sit, he'll push his chair back from the table, he'll hunch his shoulders very far forward with his hands in his lap, both his hands kind of clasped in his lap with his shoulders very extremely rolled forward, with his head looking down, nervously, like we're gonna make fun of him or something, which we're clearly not going
I
to.
I actually don't. So if it's anything like me, he gets quiet when he is bored with the emulation of human behavior, and so then he retreats. It's not a nervousness; it's actually a lack of care for what you
I,
perceive.
I mean, I was just gonna say maybe
No,
that was his way of showing disdain. Like you guys are
no,
so
he
stupid.
gets he
I'm not.
even gets a little he has a stuttering problem to a degree, like similar what you're seeing me doing right now, where I'm searching for the right word, the most optimal word to express.
Yeah, no,
Uh,
Tyler, that could also be a
but it's
tick.
different.
That
If you
could also
actually
be
asked
still a
him,
tick.
it is, yeah.
yeah, but
But
if you
trust me,
how do you actually ask him?
yeah, no, it comes up, and it's
What does he
like
say that it is?
it's his child, the childhood. Um, we don't
Bullying.
escape our childhoods totally, completely.
That's interesting
Yeah.
because I was not bullied mercilessly as a child. I wonder if it's different.
Yeah, it's not. I wasn't like intense bullying. It's just like the insecurities of childhood that stay with people even after they become uberly successful. And it's hard for people to empathize with somebody who's like, is so wildly successful. How could you still be holding on to childhood insecurities? And the answer is, well, you don't ever fully escape your childhoods, even if you reach escape velocity as a celebrity.
I agree with you, Tyler. I think the saying goes that you can take the boy out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the boy.
Yeah, anyway, but people just assume you become, a superhuman after you launch a rocket and land it, and that all your insecurities are gone forever. That's not the case. But anyway, we did.
Interesting.
We got it. We only have another 20 minutes, and then we go into VR land. And we did China, India, politics, and a touch of Africa, and we'll save VR. But Dan, did you have? We did do the unbreaking news on the green tech, med tech. There was Hamish shared a really interesting headline in the other time zone, but I wanted to see if anyone had a medtech headline they would like to share.
Tyler, we've stuffed up by double booking, but we've got a medtech room with a handful of great people at 6 o'clock as well. So in 20 minutes.
Okay. So we can splinter the room from VR and medtech in 20 minutes. That's fine.
And but we're doing a regular though on Tuesday, so it's right. If not a lot of people turn up today,
and people can see that room on the Tech News page by clicking on the title of this room, right? So thank you for that. And Dan, go ahead.
Tyler, can
I? Yeah, go.
A quick one. This is just a little announcement, I guess, that at the Climate Chat Room tonight at 7 p.m. Pacific, whatever time that is, wherever you are.
An hour and 20 from now, yeah.
There's also a Fauci room in 2 hours plus time.
Okay.
I'm saying that John Cook, who is the developer of the skepticalscience.com website, which if you ever are wondering about a climate denial meme or something and want to find out what the real thing is, you go there. And also Ben Newell, who's an expert on how we think about things. They're both going to be talking about climate communications tonight. Some people here might be interested.
Any idea what the name of the room is?
The sky is
Climate
falling.
Chat and Psychology of Climate Communication or something like that.
The sky is falling. The sky is falling.
And then
no, I think, Greg, you're confusing that with the James Bond film called Skyfall.
Oh yeah, well, that one sounds a lot more awesome.
So with the 15ish minutes we have left, flash your mics if you have something to share. There's some folks in the
Amanda. I have one. I have one for you.
Let's go Tan and then Amanda. Go ahead, Tan.
I have one for you, Taylor. I've
go for
just got a release from the Institute of Health Metrics in Washington D.C. They're estimating that most countries are underestimated the actual deaths that are directly, indirectly related to COVID as much as 2.5 times. So from their calculations, the total number of deaths that are COVID related in the US is 905,000 instead of the 574. In India, they think that currently 654,000 people have died instead of the 221. So I think as much more data comes out, we will actually get a much clearer idea how much what was the damage caused by COVID. Some of it's directly people getting ill and then dying, but a lot of it, I think we've discussed before, is people who have not been able to go to hospital to get their screening done, to get their bloods done, to get all sorts of elective surgery and therapy that would have started but was delayed. So the real impact of this, I think, is going to be 3 or 4 times as much as many of the stats in the media being mentioned.
Ooh, sorry to hear that.
Yeah, Tyler, it could also be people going around and grabbing up any statistic they can to make the confirmation bias that exists within them happen.
Ouch. John, go ahead.
Yeah, just real quickly. I think that report of 2.5x is very likely in countries where the data can be easily manipulated. I think in the U.S., it's pretty hard to manipulate it. I mean, I have exact figures for a population of 12 million people, and they're really reliable, and they map very well to the rest of the country. So I don't think we're going to see that kind of discrepancy in the U.S., but if you go to a place like India or Brazil, where the political leadership is determined to underestimate the carnage caused by their policy, that 2.5 is probably reasonable.
Did you hear a lot of the outdoor spread is actually attributable to Singapore and counting construction spread as outdoor, even though the construction was done outdoors and indoors? They just kind of checked the outdoor box when it was applicable by default, and therefore children are wearing masks at summer camp in the U.S. after being vaccinated.
I'm just wanted to call out Amir in the audience because for 2 things. One, it's been a while since we had a good update on what's happening in Tel Aviv, but more interestingly, I would love an update on the COVID side of what's happening, being that Tel Aviv, that Israel has really been kind of the leader in vaccinations. Yeah. Welcome, Amir.
Oh, sure. It's great to hear you guys again. Well, first of all, we have kind of a war in Israel right now, which makes things a bit complicated. The coronavirus is set aside. We have missiles flying over, and people die, and the outlook is not so positive. That's nothing to do with tech, but a lot of tech is being used. One of the things to notice is, Israel is protected by the Iron Dome.
Yeah.
The Iron Dome is a very advanced technology to
Indeed, it is. Yeah,
insert
it's.
the
I have to.
missiles in the middle.
It's fascinating to watch the videos of that. I mean, as a geek, like that's just beyond impressive. Yeah.
Yeah, so this Iron Dome has a few generations to it, to different ranges. The challenges are the very short range and the very long range.
Uh huh.
Very long range, the speed is very high. The very short range, there is no time to react. So still, there are some holes in the technology. But the most important thing to notice is the system cannot deal with too many targets at the same time. And the attacks on Israel these days is focused on multiple rockets, same location, same time. So actually challenges the system to how to intercept them simultaneously. And no 100% protection. So some of the rockets fell into houses.
Yeah.
It's a pure technology challenge.
I guess the other news is of like the startup ecosystem or how COVID is happening is kind of put aside in the past 48 hours, given the kind of tensions that are happening there at the moment.
Yeah, it's put aside. Actually, the saying in Israel is because that coronavirus was under control, people are totally free, so the
Ah.
tensions grow up on other sectors. So it's a bad use of vaccination. If we were still under corona, things wouldn't happen. Still,
Ah.
the environment will be
That's
everybody is at home.
but that's something that the rest of the world might need to be mindful of is at coming out of lockdowns and coming out of the pandemic. There might be some kind of psychological need for people to get, a vent in a way, for lack of a better word. And this is something that might not be understood by anthropologists because pandemics are quite rare in modern times.
100% true. I mean, for sure, going out of the COVID will bring up violence and problems that were kind of suppressed during the way of, not only because everybody was worried about other things, it's also because internal pressure was
Right.
building up based on the problems before, much higher than it was before.
Right.
So the outburst is huge.
Right. Yeah.
So that, yeah, something to take care of when it comes to coronavirus.
Yeah, precisely what I said. And what an interesting way to connect these dots. Because my initial questions were really about, the fact that you guys were really the global leader on the vaccination front. And then it's interesting to see what's happening today. But the idea that there's a connection is really mind blowing, actually.
Another problem is a huge debate about vaccinating the children, because when you vaccinate about, let's say, 60% of the population, the numbers go down dramatically, and then you get FDA approval, you can vaccinate the kids. The question is, why should you vaccinate kids when it's going down so dramatically? The kids do need it or not, you're not sure 100% about long-term side effects. There's a whole debate in the country about using it for 5 to 12 age. Let's say 12 to 16 is, I think, majority will get vaccinated, but when it comes to younger ages, there is a debate, because the reality is people came back to normal life. No worry, why vaccinate the kids? It's another topic.
Yeah.
If you want more updates, one thing is from a tech point of view and war is the fact that Israel has developed in the recent years anti-tunnel technologies, which are basically are sensor under the ground to allocate tunnels going underneath Israel, and then also have physical blocks with different alerts. It's the result, as you can see it now, is very successful. So there is no ability to penetrate into Israel from under the ground, given that very unique technology to sense from very distance. So that technology worked quite well. And other issues, I think, related to the COVID itself, I would say that in Israel it's declared that Pfizer is much better than any other attempt or other statistics. And Pfizer is going to use Israel as a lab for new vaccines, not only for COVID, because of the data and the
It's not
data.
Pfizer, it's BioNTech, ML.
Well, yeah, we know what he means. Yeah, but and I guess that was that. I guess there was some calculus and some analysis put into choosing, which company and solution Israel was going to use. But it seems like they made in hindsight, it seems like they made a very fortunate guess. To some extent, a bit of luck, perhaps, but
For sure, there is luck involved here.
Amir, I have a question for you.
Sure.
So, given that Israel is leading in all of this, technology and also in space, for example, I remember in Sri Lanka, when we had this, Sri Lanka went through this kind of 2009, there was kind of Sri Lankan government was trying to corner the so-called terrorists into a corner, and there was a lot happened in 2019. It was 2009. What happened was that they had these satellite images, which later was used to find that the Sri Lankan government actually indeed committed a genocide because they bombed civilian areas. Is Israel using any satellite just to make sure that one day when if people were to turn around, there's a lot of bombing. I'm seeing a lot of news around the headline about how Israel is committing in a way certain things that it's not really visible for the Western world what is actually really going on. All this bombing. Are they keeping any kind of transparent? Are they really committing anything against humanity? Because they have the technology and power to do so, right? Are they doing anything to keep track of who they're bombing and how they're bombing, and is the civilians being purposely targeted?
There's a lot of international press there at the moment, no doubt. Yeah.
No, but that's something else, right? So the satellite, the technology is there to keep track of where the bombing is being bombed, right? Because satellites gives a much closer granular. Because in Sri Lanka we did that because what happened, we used the later after the 2009, when the world walked away, we had the satellite images to prove that Sri Lankan government did indeed bombed hospitals and innocent civilians, and so that's why we managed to get them into UN in order to get the genocide thing pushed through. But I'm just saying that I know Amir just Israel is doing amazing. They're way ahead and all of this stuff. But given that is so much going on right now, the Palestinian, it's something that we don't talk about in the tech news. There's a lot of bombing, a lot of civilians. I mean, there's so much going on in there. And I just wonder that is Israel is using this power of their technology to keep track of if they if there's anything being misused.
Yes, indeed. Israel is combining a few sources of information, video, stills, and on the ground um, intelligence into one command and control center. You get information from all sources about a very specific location or suspected locations, and you have to make a judgment call whether, first of all, if it's a safe place, if you want to bomb it from civilians' point of view, or are there missiles going out and to what direction? And naturally, as you may know, Israel is very advanced on the audio side, tracking all kind of transmissions, of course, cell phones, but much more than that. So you can also hear and record who is aiming for what command is being done. You connect it to the satellite, you connect it to, there are these balloons over the West Bank and Gaza Strip, so they kind of video from medium distance, and then you have the unmanned um, kind of aircrafts flying around, and you have on the ground and underground now audio devices and sensors. So you have to have a command control that combines all these aspects, including the human factor and the audio. So it's quite complex. I think it's still not the best solution out there to combine everything because there are always additional information coming in, and you have to decide what is important and how preference it is, and then have the human factor factored in the decision making. So I believe that the sad side that we have a war, the good side is the technology is always advancing after such cases, and then it goes to the civil side. So you can use these technologies a few years later, or sometimes even a year later to civilian uses and have new startups. It's part of the ecosystem. It's strange enough. If Israel would not have the wars, it would not be a startup ecosystem. The wars are an engine to creativity, and it's an engine to kind of military civil interaction, subsidizing indirectly the development, the R&D, just because you have to defend your life. It's kind of a strange cycle. But I can talk about it a lot. It's too long.
Yeah.
Hey, Tyler,
Yep.
could I add a little bit of color to the Amir's comments about the debate about vaccinating children? Because the committee that I chair on vaccine policy, we just had a presentation yesterday from a guy who published some brilliant models in Science back in March. And what the models show pretty clearly, based upon a lot of good evidence, is that the more a virus tends to attack younger people, the longer it takes to overcome the pandemic phase before it goes into an endemic phase. And it's almost certain that this is going to end up being the fifth common cold coronavirus, which is not a big deal. But whether it takes 5 years to get there or 10 years to get there depends a lot on how the new variants attack younger age groups. And what we're seeing with each successive variant of concern, South Africa, Brazil, UK, India, the so-called B1617 variant, they're starting to be more contagious and virulent in the younger population. So the reason that I believe you will see more and more of the talking heads on media advocating for pediatric vaccines over time is that if we don't suppress this thing better at a global scale, we're going to continue seeing evolution to more virulence and contagion in the younger populations, forcing us into a much longer transition from pandemic to endemic, and that would involve losing a lot more lives and a much bigger hit to the economy. This is John. I'm done speaking.
Thanks, John. And I want to welcome Leon. We covered China, and I know you have a habit now of coming in at the end, but you do have an interesting headline to share. What? Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry about that. I mean, unfortunately, I'm someone really living on W2, so I cannot spend too much time here. Otherwise, I would love to spend all my time with you guys. So today, you probably can say, I put my son as my profile picture because I guess actually if he were here, he would be much better, speaker for this headline. So do you know actually Chinese invented a new cryptocurrency called Shiba Inu? It's a meme against the dog.
Shiba Inu.
Whatever.
Yeah,
Shiba Inu. Yes.
The Shiba.
Yes.
The Shiba is the Japanese dog,
The Japanese dog.
It's on the cover. The Dogecoin dog is a Shiba Inu, the Japanese dog named Shiba.
SoftBank too.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. So they wanted to make fun of this. So they created the Shiba Inu Bitcoin. Surprisingly, traded really well. Their price increased like 800% in a short period of time. And people,
but Leon,
right?
I'm very curious. How come the Chinese are always using Japanese name for all their things nowadays?
Because the people of my age or a little bit younger are really the people who are pushing all those kind of stuff, and they were big fan of Japanese manga. Like Slam Dunk, all those things. Every single Japanese manga.
Yeah, like the Genki Forest String.
Yeah, exactly. All those things. So Shiba Inu is one of the most popular breed in China as well, because that dog is famous for being smart and pretty naughty and very misbehaved.
Yeah.
Right. That's exactly what the cryptocurrency have been doing. I think that's a perfect thing, and it's kind of interesting. Also, like a good joke, right? But in the end, people made money out of it. The funny thing is that when Elon Musk said, this whole Bitcoin was just hustle, just over his show, based on the article, the Shiba Inu Bitcoin or whatever coin price dropped 30% just during the show. So just tell you, yeah. So funny, so funny. You want to look on the if you want to check the article. It's
I
on
see it.
my,
I'm going to tweet
Twitter.
it. I'm going to share it on the Tech News Around the World Twitter account, which is TNATW. And it is a very funny article. Essentially, China has its own Dogecoin now called the Shiba Inu coin, which only launched a week ago, and it's the new Doge for China.
Tyler, can I say? I joined one of the Dogecoin rooms on, I think it's Sunday morning. You know, some of us who don't sleep, and they mentioned Shiba Inu. I put money in, and literally, it's over. It's crazy how much it's doubled. Like, so I'm super happy.
If you all want to be nuts, there's a really good new coin. It's called Pussy Coin.
Yep.
Seriously.
Oh my God.
You can do that one. You can
The
listen to
pussy
the
and the
guys.
nuts
But
coin.
this is getting so ridiculous. Why so dumb?
I
But some of
invested.
them are scams.
Well, I'm predicting Bitcoin will rise quite a lot.
Oh my God.
Bitcoin, yeah, I saw that. But
You
the
mean the Chin
Tailcoin
Chin
one is
coin?
quite.
Yes. Gender equality. If you have a pussy coin, I want my dick coin. You know, otherwise there's a reverse discrimination.
This is crazy.
Oh my
I have a
Did you say,
trademark on
Leon? Did you say little
Bitcoin.
Bitcoin?
I have a trademark on Bitcoin. It's named
I
after
can't
me.
wait for us to testify before the House and Senate on these new coins. It'll be fantastic.
So,
do we want another, Tyler? Do we want another headline just to end it off?
Okay, go ahead, Jonathan.
Sorry, my headline is not finished
So-
yet. Sorry, let me just finish
What's
it.
up, Leon?
The second part. It's actually a serious part.
Okay.
So the digital RMB right now is being like a push out really aggressively. Right now, AliPay, which is the second biggest, e-payment system, the same as WeChatPay, they are accepting digital RMB. That's one. And also the Qingdao government is aggressive pushing out the digital RMB in the city. So I guess it's coming. They are really aggressive doing this.
Cool.
I mean, AliPay is doing this, makes sense, right? Jack Ma want to make do some good for the government because he was kind of scouted a little bit.
Right.
It makes perfect sense in my opinion.
So you have to use that to buy a Qingdao beer then.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah, that's a user.
So breaking on the FT, the German government is banning Facebook on sharing its WhatsApp data. And in particular, basically, the German regulator is banning Facebook from processing any data captured by WhatsApp within Germany, and they are going to seek an EU-wide ban.
Interesting. I've got one I want to share real fast, which is TikTok is launching a tool for brands to recruit employees. So TikTok will now be competing with Monster.com and other recruitment platforms, but in a much more Gen Z, spicy, dance-driven kind of way. TikTok launching tool for brands to recruit employees is one headline. Intel is making progress on chips. And then there was another Chinese headline while you're here, while we still have a few of our Chinese friends on stage. China is fining ed tech firms backed by Alibaba and Tencent for anti-competition violations. China is expanding its far-reaching tech into online education, issuing penalties to two of the country's fastest-growing tutoring apps for violating competition and pricing laws, Bloomberg reports. So it's the Tencent-backed company and an Alibaba-backed company. They're two separate companies, have each been fined about $400,000 by the state, and the fines are handed out after it was found out that there was fake teacher qualifications and they used fake user reviews. And the ed tech companies said they accept the penalties and will address the issues. And then the really interesting point is that the China securities analyst told Bloomberg that the actions against these two companies are part of an ongoing clampdown on after-school tutoring services for their illegal activities. So the state really wants them to be more not doing these fake reviews and etc. And so they're getting fined, which makes sense to me. But that I love your Chinese Dogecoin, Shiba coin headline, Leon, and good to see you back here. And thanks to everybody. We're going to wrap up because you have two rooms you can go to. Ben and others are doing a medtech room, and Victoria and Michael and others are doing the Metaverse VR AR HTC ViveCon room, and those have both
I'm doing
started.
a Trump 2024 room after this.
All right. And the MedTech room is called Tuesday MedTech News with Ben and Heyman and other MedTech folks. So feel free to join. I'll be dancing between both of them myself. And